absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, gotta get it in before the winter comes, you know?
Yeah. So, can I move that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So it's already recording. We don't
cool.
have to talk to the camera.
Yeah, for sure. And is it like a long discussion?
I'm looking for at least 5 minutes. So.
Oh yeah, 5 minutes is fine. Not a problem.
Okay. So my question is, what do you think happens after we die? Mm-hmm. And how did whatever you believe or don't believe about it?
Sure, of course.
How did you get there?
No, absolutely.
So,
all right, this is
hello.
Steffi, by the way.
Okay.
Just answering some questions for a church project this guy's doing.
So, I don't know if you want to be in it. Maybe not. Okay.
So let's see here. So what do I think happens after we die? Well, I think the real honest answer, if I'm going to have to, speak from the heart, of course, is that I do think that there is not very much clarity on what is offered after death occurs. And I guess I'm going to try and keep these answers as honest as opposed to being like,
sure,
aware of the
what you're supposed to say, or like.
Well, right, I don't know. It's so I grew up in a very religious community. I went to a Christian high school. I have studied the Bible for sure. My parents are still very religious.
Yeah. And
so
Protestant or
I'm
Catholic?
not very Protestant.
Okay.
Protestant, non-denominational primarily. Very spiritual. They're not as excited about religious structure as they are about just having a personal relationship with God and with being. And they both grew up in religious communities. My mother grew up Catholic and my father grew up Protestant. So I'm very sensitive to that, and no necessarily disagreements or anything like that with religion. But as far as my own personal philosophy, I think that there's a big question mark. And I'll just kind of leave it at that and let you kind of keep asking questions.
Yeah. Would you say there? Well, maybe when I say question, or you say question mark, would you say don't believe in God at all?
Well, I would
a particular God.
I would like to distance myself from atheism because I think atheism is a statement that says with certainty that there is nothing.
Yeah.
That we pass away and our biological kind of processes finish. And we no longer see it. And I'm not necessarily confident enough to say that.
Yeah.
Because I think that has the same kind of hubris that,
yes.
say, very specific religions do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make a statement that I don't think that there is necessarily a higher power or something more out there. But I feel wary of the certainty of very specific religions. From the Christian faith to the Jewish faith to the Muslim faith to to Baha'i faith,
right.
to Unitarian and all that jazz. I think that Unitarian, I guess they're a little bit kind of whatever.
They're kind of everyone.
It's more of a community, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a level of certainty in very specific religious statements about what occurs after death that I find just as unsatisfying because it's a claim of knowledge that humans have, and I think that if anybody really claims to know God, I think that a statement that has to be made is the fact that we actually really don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my skepticism of a omniscient, omnipresent higher power.
Yeah.
Is to make that statement means to claim that we know, and I'm uncomfortable with human. I'm uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, was there ever a time when you felt you did know, or growing up?
I grew up in a very devout Christian family. Went to church every single Sunday, sometimes on Wednesdays. It was a very active part of our life. My father was actually a preacher back a while ago. He's not really a preacher anymore, but all this is to say, so grew up very much so within the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And the fact that Jesus is the Son of God.
The group pressure to go along with the belief. Or
very
whatever.
much so, yeah.
Yeah.
So to say that I was very devout in my younger years, I think would be a statement that I also wouldn't make because when you're a kid, you kind of go along with that.
Yeah.
And then when I went to college and I started reading more texts and just kind of got out of that religious fold. Because I'm from a very religious community as well. I grew up in West Michigan.
Okay.
And then Holland, Michigan, and you stand anywhere and you throw a rock, you'll hit a church.
Yeah.
So it's a very religious community.
Yeah. A lot of people from my church are from that part of Michigan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
No, and all great people,
Yeah.
but very devoutly religious. And so I think once I got away from that, it was more so just being like, yeah, I wouldn't call myself like a Christian, just because that's I don't necessarily espouse in that kind of.
Now, would you say so? It sounds like the question mark thing, maybe agnostic, right? Or
yeah,
not so
I would
much?
probably put myself closest to agnostic, which is
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of the terminology, but you have to know thyself, and then
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah.
Because it does seem kind of
I mean,
like
it's
this
like
wishy-washy,
labels.
like you're not
Yeah.
making a statement.
Would you say? I guess when I think of agnostics, I think of people like two different types. One would be, since we can't know, I don't want to know. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Another might be, well, I don't know, but I'm still searching. I really do want to know.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
No, I would
So-
say I'm the latter type for sure. Just
still
because,
searching kind of thing, or
well, not necessarily. Still searching for truth, of course.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But for me, truth exhibits itself in a very different way. So
Mhm.
for me, truth comes in really getting to what is the basis for life, for existence, for abstract thought, and this involves philosophical study. You know, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a good human? You know, to be agnostic or not.
it's
to
not
tie
just a
yourself to
religious
religion.
question.
It's a
worldview.
morality. Yeah, morality
Yeah.
is something that can, you know, secular morality. You
Mhm.
know, even though it's not evident in our culture,
Mhm.
I do believe that there can be morality that's not necessarily tied up to like a religious structure. So there's that truth, but also truth in nature. So like I study physics. I
Mhm.
work as a physics professor in the in the North Loop of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And for me, I think a lot of the beauty of physics and for truth for me was saying, okay, let's go for something like a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really beautiful because it actually does involve things that we cannot see. You know, the light that we observe from the sun, there's a large majority of that light that you can't observe and I can't observe.
Yeah.
It comes in infrared and comes in ultraviolet rays. Our hearing is limited to an upper bound and a lower bound. You know, even
Yeah.
dogs can hear things that we can't
So
hear.
there's a
and stuff
realm
like
that we're not aware of.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think for me, physics was a way to really seek out truth in that
Mhm.
way, because it does also involve that we can't see. Because I don't necessarily think that the reality that we see and observe is the only reality that exists.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tie myself to that. But I do think that, at least for me, it was very satisfying and very personal to engage in nature and what's going on
Yeah.
in a way that didn't necessarily directly involve my senses. And I think philosophy is a lot of that as well. You know, I read Descartes, you know, I think therefore I am, a lack of trust in the senses, you know.
Yeah.
And from that, I think there comes a lot of really interesting questions.
I want
Like
to ask
moral
a
philosophy.
couple questions of you as a physics
Oh, sure,
professor.
yeah, of course.
Um,
Well, adjunct professor, so I don't have any authority within the physics community, but
well,
I
I
have
don't know
studied
much about
yeah.
physics at all. So,
Yeah,
is
so
it true that some of the laws, physical laws of nature, they're finding them to be not so constant? Like, for
So,
example, gravity
this is
or
the
time
beauty-
or, you know,
Mhm.
different things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is one of the. Let's see. Let me think what this was saying. So one of the beautiful things I think in kind of searching for things and in searching for like truth and also in like physics and in study
Mm-hmm.
is that when you find something that's not true, or you find like an experiment that is a counter example to things that you believe to be like true,
Mm-hmm.
the best attitude is to be able to like kind of change your worldview on the spot when you have, and not, you know, of course the experiments must be well vetted and by
Yeah.
a large amount of competent observers. But since the 1600s, Newton thought that time was consistent, right? You could have two completely simultaneous events happening at the same point in time, right?
Mhm.
That space, you move around in space and you can move forwards and back and up and down, but time had a very consistent ticking, okay?
Mhm.
Like tick, tick, tick. But then what we found out in, you know, the early 1900s, you know, 1926 about is when we first kind of figured this out. We learned that time doesn't actually move in this consistent rate. It actually depends on your movement, right? So if you move faster,
Mm-hmm.
time, you know, will move slower for you than someone who's standing still. So you'll have a clock and they'll have a clock, and then you'll move close to the speed of light, and then you'll kind of like come back and you'll be like, okay, so let's look at how much time has elapsed on these clocks. Their time will have it will be further into the future than your time. You'll read 2 o'clock and they'll read 3
That's so
o'clock
weird.
because the amount of time that's elapsed for you is less than for them.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I mean, one thing we thought to be true is like not entirely true.
Yeah.
And there's always these constant reformations of what we believe to be like actually true with like nature.
Yeah.
And that's the things that I find so refreshing about the community is that people are very willing to like take in new data and like have conceptions that really don't fit with our macroscopic conceptions.
Yeah.
Because we don't see that. We don't observe that in our everyday existence. You don't drive
Right.
really fast in your car and you look at your watch and be like, oh, you know what? I was driving
Exactly.
pretty fast, so
Right.
let me just recheck that with your clock.
I mean,
type of thing.
so I've been talking to different people, running this question by,
Uh-huh.
what happens after we die and all
for
that.
sure.
And, there's the whole postmodern movement where they're saying nothing can be known for sure,
Mm-hmm.
So modernism would be that there's constants, there's patterns in nature, you
Mm-hmm.
can know things for sure, and so I think people are moving into postmodern thought, which is more nothing, it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah, it's all relative.
Yeah.
That's something that sorry, you're asking for a response on that, or is this just a...
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, is that a reflection of the fact that they're finding out? I guess I was thinking more recent discoveries of laws of nature
Well, I guess
being broken, I guess.
The first thing I would say to that is I think that statement can be valid, but the thing that I don't like about that statement is that it doesn't come with any sort of, what's the word, qualifiers, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's an accurate statement, but I think it's an accurate statement that people make without thinking about accuracy, right?
I mean, yeah, like the guys I'm thinking of right now, they were like, yeah, I don't even know if I'm talking to you right now.
Oh, that's
like,
a bit much, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Or-
I understand the philosophy, like how it breaks down from, but I think that also comes sometimes from a misunderstanding. So, for instance, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That's another great example of and the statement of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is simply this: you have a particle, and it's moving, and you can know with a high degree of accuracy its position or how fast it's moving.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an inherent fuzziness where it's like if it's with basically the more you know about one, the less you know about the other. So the more you know about its exact position at this point in time, the less you know about its velocity. Okay. So that's a statement that basically says there is a limit to what you can know about this particle. And that's where people are, we can't really know anything. And it's like, well, okay, hold on now. You can't know about this particle to a certain degree of accuracy, but then let's talk about that accuracy that's on the Planck scale. The Planck scale is 10 to the negative 32 meters. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, there is a degree of inaccuracy there, but it's on such a small scale, we can't even measure that.
Right.
That's still theoretical.
Right. Yeah.
The closest position we can measure at this moment is with an interferometer, and that's 10 to the negative 17 meters. So we're, and we've gotten to 10 to the negative 17. Like, that's where we're at, and that's solid. But then we, don't know about 10 to the negative 32.
Yeah.
Okay, but, so I think you kind of take a bit of information, and then you kind of can go hog wild with it.
Yeah. The other question I want to ask you is, so for me, I'm a Christian.
Yeah, you're a Christian, absolutely.
And I grew up with Christian parents. I grew up in a Lutheran church.
that's
I'm
wonderful.
from Minnesota. So I
I
guess
was actually born in Minnesota.
Really?
I was in Shakopee for 7
okay.
That's actually where my dad was a preacher.
Oh, okay. Forest Lake, if you know where that is.
Oh, actually, that doesn't familiar. I think we had some family friends who lived
On the
in
way
Forest
to
Lake.
Duluth, north.
Oh,
of
nice. Yeah, I actually have
Minneapolis.
a really good friend of mine from Duluth. Yeah, we
Okay.
were just south of the Twin Cities, about 45 miles.
Yeah. So, but I would say that the main reason I do believe is, I mean, it begins with a belief in God, and then that God is, the creator, and it has a purpose, and so there's kind of like a whole logical line of thinking that brings me to the God of Christianity. But that very first idea that that God exists, to me, I look around and I see creation, I see just matter and energy, and the fact of existence to me says that there must have been that first cause, that uncaused cause that brought everything else about. And how do you, as a physicist, or at least a physics teacher,
Yeah, for sure.
how do you look at that?
So for me, it's they're actually kind of two different questions in my mind, right? So one question is the why, and one question is the how.
Yeah.
Right? I think science kind of asks questions that are limited to the forefront of what you know, and then you say, then how do we figure out what we don't know? But it's always a question of like how, right? So we know we live in this universe, and we know that it comes from something. We know that the universe is expanding, and so we say, okay, but how could that happen? Well, we say, well, then the universe must have come from like a certain point, and then we say, okay, but then how did that happen? It's like, well, there must have been like a very like large kind of like event, and unfortunately I wish I knew a little bit more about cosmology to be able to give you more detail on that. But I think that there is a compatibility certainly between a faith-based argument and a kind of like a how is this occurring argument, right? So for instance, faith is, I think, a large part of being able to say, like, look, there is no definitive necessary like knowledge. You can see inspiration for God. You can see inspiration for His influence on our world.
You can see like evidence, but not. I keep going back to we have evidence, but not proof. I would never say I have proof for God
for
or
sure.
anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an element of faith that kind of actually jumps past the whole like how, right? The whole science bit of it. And I think that they're perfectly compatible. I think one of the most unfortunate things that you see sometimes is when people view there is an incompatibility between this kind of like mode of investigation and like religious thought, for sure.
Yeah.
I guess I have some questions for you. So would you view? So what is your thoughts on the many doors to the same room hypothesis, right? Because like Christianity and Judaism and Islam all have the same base in a monotheistic religion, right?
Yeah.
And back in the olden days, right, it was monotheism versus polytheism, and monotheism for sure won out,
Yeah.
So we see quite a few, and the fact that each Bible is, it's kind of like we have the original. We have Emperor. With Strikes Back. What is it? What's the Star Wars trilogy? I don't know. The joke
Empire
lost it.
Strikes
But
Back.
yeah, the Empire. Right. So you have the first episode, which is Judaism.
Oh yeah.
And then you have the sequel, which is Jesus kind of reforming, the Ten Commandments. With love the Lord your God, and love love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, type of thing. And then you have like the Muslim edition, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say that
the correction to
exactly
the
it's
Christian.
like Jesus, and which says that Jesus is like a prophet, not the Messiah, but a prophet for sure.
Yeah.
When you look into it, like Islam is really, they're all very peaceful actually.
Yeah.
There's just no
Well, I think they're all based on that very first thought that we're made in God's image. Everyone has inherent worth and value just because you're, God made you, and we should respect that.
And this is one of the things I guess that bothers me about the specific, I guess, sects of monotheism, right? Is that you have this like, there's a lot of conflict between these different like religions in certain sections of the globe, and even now in America, we just banned Muslims coming from this country, and we are a Christian-founded nation. Like what does that say? So, they used to be brothers in monotheism, and now they've kind of gotten away from that. And so my question for you is like, how do you view this kind of like struggle? With because you seem like someone who like thinks very deeply about your religion and feels very passionately. And I think that's admirable. I think.
I have to, and I do have to have answers when I talk to people.
Well, you don't have to. I don't have answers. Nobody has answers.
No, I have ideas. I don't have. My idea. So, the big question is Christianity exclusive? Is it the one way to? It's
very grace based. So in that way, it's inclusive for sure.
Yeah. But it's saying that Christ is the way to God. Christ himself said that. I don't think we can,
and that's true. Yeah,
I don't think we can really take Christ seriously if we don't take his claims, which is not just based on a few verses. It's like the way he carried himself. The way.
So do you think? What do you think about the interpretation that it was more so his philosophy, and not necessarily like. There's like the Aryan belief, not Aryanism like Nazis, but Aryanism is the belief that you have you don't the Trinity is not necessarily
that Jesus
true,
was
right?
not.
Well, it still claims that Jesus was the Son of God. It
Yeah.
does still claim that. It just
But it would say that Jesus was made by God, and so at some time Jesus didn't exist until God brought him into existence. So it's like Jesus is a creation. The Arian controversy is it Arian or Aryan? But
I don't know.
That Jesus was not of one substance with the Father. That's why they brought in the Nicene Creed.
Not of one substance, yeah.
That's why the whole Council of Nicaea was, happened as to deal with that issue. We had one person, one bishop in the church who was creating all sorts of conflict by teaching that Jesus was just a human being and not God.
So so the funny thing actually is that my dad was a pastor, right? And so he actually was a big fan of the non-Trinity, right? Not that Jesus was a man. I don't think they went that far, but that he was a son of God, and so God was in him, very much so. So not like a man, but that there was the Son of God, a offspring of God, so to speak.
Yeah.
So very much so, like sinless and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But that the Holy Ghost was then a mechanism of God, and then there is God. And that they didn't actually form this like Triforce like God thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in that conception, well, and that's a funny thing, because they don't necessarily believe that, and I think they're very much devoutly Christians. They're not, I don't know if they're saying that everybody else is going to
like the Jehovah's
heaven
Witnesses, that's their take on it.
That everybody's going to the same place?
No, their take is that Jesus was a creation of God, and that God made Jesus, and then Jesus made everything else. So Jesus is like this really exalted being, but still a creation, whereas God would be the creator.
Gotcha.
Mormons, same thing. Muslims, same thing. So it seems like that becomes a very crucial issue.
Okay.
And the reason I believe it is a crucial issue for me is like I can't let it go. It's like if Jesus isn't God in the flesh, then his sacrifice. So I'll try to put this in a nutshell because I want to respect you guys' time here. But so the idea, like when I sin, when I go against God's rules, when I go against God's law that He's put in my heart, my conscience, I know that I'm sinning against God. It's an offense against God. So if I was offending another person, maybe my punishment would need to be.
Ribs, by the way,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe my punishment would need to be, like if I hit a person, it'd be like a night in jail. If I hit the president, justice, God being good is completely just. There must be a just punishment for the crime. Justice is a good thing. Most of us believe in justice. But if I offend, if I hit the president, maybe I'll get 3 years in jail, right? If I somehow hit God or offend God, would that mean that I get 6 years in jail? Like God is like twice as important as the president? I would say no. God is infinitely more important than the president. So therefore, the punishment would be an infinite punishment. This is why the Bible teaches about hell. So it's like, so God's justice would require an infinite punishment, but His love says someone else, a worthy substitute, could take my place. So if Jesus is just, so that's where Jesus comes in on the cross. So if a person died on the cross for me, it's like, well, number one, if that person was sinful, then they need to take their own punishment for their own sins, right? Justice would demand that.
For sure.
But if he was sinless, but yet a created being, then he has finite value.
Interesting. I see what you're saying.
And so if Jesus isn't God, then the substitute or the sacrifice
really
isn't worthy. And I think all
we
of
have
those
to sacrifice one of those every now and again. Where it's like just like the lamb.
It's
you have to watch
and so
every
the
year.
Old Testament lamb had a limited value, like 1 year, right, or whatever, and it was more like a symbol of what was to come. And so with Jesus, it's like if you look at all the religions, the beliefs, the sects, I guess, that teach that Jesus is less than God, they say, well, okay, you need to believe in Jesus, but you need to add something to that. Good works or whatever.
Yeah,
so it's like Jesus plus your good effort.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that makes Christianity so unique, right? Is the unlimited grace. There's some things that you must do in, I guess, the other monotheistic religions, whereas that's the one. There's this famous quote, right? There's a bunch of theologians in a room or something like that, and I forget who actually said it, but they were just trying to figure out what made Christianity like unique, and someone comes in and just like from the bathroom and like grace. It's grace. That's what makes it unique.
Yeah. It's the one religion that I know of where we can't save ourselves through our good efforts or whatever. That it's got a negative aspect to it, which is to say, I'm that sinful, that I'm that far from God that I can't even save myself. Which is, it's kind of like the good news of the gospel is really good, that I can be saved and go to heaven and be with my Maker forever. That's great news, but we have to realize, well, what are we saved from? The bad news is we've sinned, we've broken God's commands. It's hard to take, a lot of people don't want to hear that. But I think it's kind of like if someone said, I paid your fine $1,000, you're free to go, and you're like, I never broke any laws. It's like you have to let them know what they did before the good news of what's been done for them makes sense,
Yeah,
and that's
for sure.
so that's why grace is so amazing. Grace is something we don't deserve. It's how sweet the sound, because I was a wretch, I was lost. That's a great song.
Yeah, it is. Did you know that he actually what was it? Was it the person who actually left the faith and then they heard their own song on like the train or something like that, and then it actually brought them back to the faith? I don't know.
Well, as far as I know, the story behind that song is that he was a slave trader. Like he was a captain of a slave ship, and then he became a Christian. And that's, I don't know.
Maybe it wasn't that
how
him.
true that is.
Yeah.
It sounds really
Either
good.
one, they're both great stories. And at the end of the day, right, they're all stories to teach you how to live, yeah.
So I want to leave you with this. I want to respect your time.
Well,
together
I actually
here,
have one more question
sure,
for you. So
yeah.
I'll ask the question, and then you can leave us with the thought.
Yeah, I'm not in any hurry, but I don't want to overstay my welcome.
So. No, for sure. One other question that I have, and this is a question that's been plaguing me, because I do, I have a lot of friends of mine who are, very active in religious circles and, very devout, stuff like that, which is something I respect for sure. I think faith is important, especially like, on a personal level. One of the issues, though, is I feel like there's a lot of times where when religiosity can can bleed into aspects of life and kind of. So, for instance, in the political realm, there is like a very vocal religious majority who seems to be pushing forward very unchristian values.
Yeah.
So for me, I guess one question for you is, what is your stance on Christians' role as caretakers of the earth? As Adam and Eve in the garden, our role is to caretake what we have. One of the things that bothers me within large religious circles, and one of my great friends is actually in this group called Young Evangelicals for Climate Change.
Okay.
And so I noticed a change happening within the younger generation in the church, within evangelicals and non-denominational and what have you. A lot of people where I'm from are Christian Reformed church. So all of all these people I know are Christian Reformed, but they're from Christian Reformed. So very Calvinist-based theology, which has its beauty, but that's another conversation for another time. I'm bothered sometimes by how you see people not being willing to caretake for the earth.
Callousness.
Well, specifically with like global warming and stuff like that. It's like there's this kind of almost very kind of capitalist-minded mindset, how that's like good and everybody should take care of themselves, whereas like it seemed to me that in the second commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like when it gets to a large organizational structure in religion, that doesn't happen, and so that's one of I think one of the primary challenges, I think, for the church is to separate themselves from that image.
Yeah.
But I don't know I don't know if there's a theological basis for this. Why, like, for instance, right? So a lot of people are like pro-life, right? And that's fine. I think that there's no issue with that stance. But then all of a sudden there's this issue where once the child gets born, then you don't care about that life anymore. You don't care about if you got a single mother working like 3 jobs or something like that, she can't afford to feed her kids. People are like cutting social programs and stuff like that, and like welfare and all that jazz.
Yeah.
And so then there's also that paradox, right? And it seems to be wrapped up in this kind of political machine, which is something that's very disturbing for me, because we are called to love our neighbor, and we are called to care for, poor people, for old people, for people who can't take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And I see this structure completely not endorsing that. And that to me is, and of course what you said, humans sin. We are born with sin. And, we have to be forgiven because our sin is so great that grace is necessary, of course. So nobody's going to be able to do it perfectly. That's not necessarily the mark or something like that. But there's such a divergence sometimes, and I find that very troubling.
I think what I'm discovering and have discovered, or I'm in the process of discovering.
For sure. Well, we're all that's what life is. That's
as I've
growing.
talked with different people, I talk with a lot. Many are really turning to atheism, and but so as a Christian, I believe that everybody has a conscience. Everyone has a God-given conscience, whether they believe in God or not, whether they're Muslim, like whatever religion, whatever their view, everybody has a conscience, and so I haven't met yet someone who is, say, atheist, and just it's because they just want to go and sin and just be a horrible person. So like the atheist creed is good without God. In other words, it's like I don't need the punishment of hell or the reward of heaven to be a good person. I'm just a good person, And so all around the world you have people that are jumping onto these different issues, like the environment, not so much abortion, I guess, but different issues where it's like justifying their existence. And that's the thing that drives so many religions, where we say we can be good enough, we can kind of earn God's favor, we can justify our existence, we can be good. The only problem is we want to be good on our terms, not on God's terms. So we want, like getting back to even the Garden of Eden, we want to eat from that tree that's forbidden, but we have excuses for why we do it. And so we want to show that we're a good person, but we want to be good on our terms. And to me, it's like, no, the whole issue, why was it so wrong to, eat from this tree, is because God said don't do it. We need to be willing to accept God's rules no matter what. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is issues like you're talking about, I think are issues for the whole human race. They're not just for Christianity.
Oh, for sure.
They're issues of the conscience,
So that's true, but the issue is that then if we're talking about vocal minorities who are for and against different let me see here, modes of action, I suppose. I don't want to get too political and talk about like policy or something like that, but like certain actions, right? Yeah. Then if it is a human problem, then why is the vocal religious minority on the wrong side of this issue? If I'm going to be honest about my stance, right? Like, so I do think like, global warming is an issue.
For example, the environment,
that's just a real hot, because I'm a scientist. It's like
I think in our country,
and that's one thing that I think is so antithetical to not only conscious values but also to religious values.
Yeah,
we are caretakers of this earth. Yeah, right? And that's a charge given to us by God.
I think the best attitude to take is sustainability. We need to look at the environment and we need to love our neighbor as ourselves, and our neighbor means our neighbor in future generations.
For sure.
I think we've never been closer to Christ's coming, and the world ending than we are today, but that could be 1,000 generations away.
Yeah, of course.
And so we need to have a contingency plan. We need to
Well,
make
it's
sure
not a
that what we're
contingency
doing.
plan. It's a charge. It's a
Yeah.
charge from God.
It's
that's
to
in the
take-
Bible. If
yeah.
you believe that the
It
Bible
is.
is the
We're
is the,
caretakers
is the word
of
of
the
God.
earth.
Yeah.
Yes. Totally.
So that's what it's like.
Yeah.
And this is not to lambast, because the funniest thing is that whenever I talk to people who are religious about this,
Mm-hmm.
they're almost all on the same fence. Like, yeah, of course we should be taking better care of the earth. We should
Yeah.
we should be doing a better job at curbing our carbon emissions. And the real other issue, right, is that we're supposed to be helping. If we're supposed to be helping people who can't help themselves, which is
Yeah.
another charge.
Yeah.
Then the real issue is that global warming, when we have this rise in sea levels,
Yeah.
then the people who are really going to be screwed, it's not going to be America. It's not going to be China. It's not going to be Russia.
It's going to be the
It's not
poorest
going to be
of the
EU.
poor.
It's going to be people in India. It's going to be people in Polynesia. It's going to be people living in coastal areas and in countries that have no ability to take care of their poor.
Yeah.
And so it's a double whammy there, because it's not only are we lacking in the caretaker front, we're also lacking in taking care in taking care of future poor people. You
Yeah.
know, and the second coming is nigh. But once again, you have a valid point in the sense that we don't know how nigh it is.
I don't think that
and you know
is
what?
a
It's been
valid
nigh
excuse.
ever since. Yeah, and that excuse is so
Yeah.
frustrating. And so I think you, as an individual person, a person is smart, but people are stupid. So and so I one of the things that I always like, and I think it's happening, especially through my friend who's in this group of young evangelicals for climate change.
Uh-huh.
I think there needs to be a more vocal group within the community that really calls people attention to the fact that they are focusing on maybe perhaps their own. I mean, you say people who have their own conscience, their own God-given conscience. Everybody has their own God-given conscience, and there's like very direct charges that there's no sort of vocal minority speaking up against or about that, because they're not towing the party line, and it's a human thing. It's a man-made thing. This kind of party line that if you're going to be like a good religious person, you have these things, but then you also have to take these things, right? It's like a pro-life stance versus like, and then if you're going to be pro-life, well, you have to be like this, and this, and it's just like there needs to be a vocal minority within the community to start talking about this stuff, because that's a major challenge for, I think, a lot of people. If you're going to proselytize, and if people are going to like try and convince people and bring people to the faith, and get them to see the fact that they are creations of God and they have God's love and that they can take solace in that, the community has to be better, because I think that these are aspects that really push people away from the church, and that's what pushes me away from the organizational structure of a church. And in that sense, that's what pushes you away from people who are religious, and that's unfortunate, because people are beautiful. An individual person, an individual Christian, or some of the, they're great people when you talk to them one-on-one. But then you have this organizational structure, and then you have real power. The president of the Evangelical Association met with George W. Bush every single Monday for his entire career. It's an immense amount of power. And that power can be used for good, to carry out what has been given to us in the Bible. And it's not happening. It's not being used, and that's a bummer, man. That's a big old bummer.
I mean, it is a matter of priorities. There are a lot of different issues to be thinking about. Not just priorities of money. Like how are we going to spend money? How are we going to? But it's also priorities of time.
And it's a bummer about bureaucracy.
So for me, so I'm I feel like it's important to have conversations about the gospel and try to help people understand it better.
For sure.
I don't think that it's my role is to convert anyone. That's God's role. So I don't feel any pressure there. But should I go out, for example, and try to, instead of talking about the gospel, should I talk about climate change?
I think you should talk to other Christians about climate change, and then as a culture, as that change, people will feel attracted to that culture. Let God do the work. That's God's job.
The way I look at it is, not a whole lot of people are, a whole lot of Christians are really actively sharing their faith. So I feel like it's something that I need to do because I can.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, I do believe that if a person were to take God's word seriously, maybe become a Christian, take God's word seriously, they're going to realize everyone's made in God's image. We're here to take care of the earth. It's like a lot of things are going to fall into place. Education is important. I'm actually a high school teacher.
Oh yeah, no, I think education is one of the most important things over time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what really truly lifts people up out of poverty is when
Yeah.
you give them a good education.
But I feel like I could teach
You know, actually,
people.
a funny story. Betsy DeVos,
Uh-huh.
same high school. I went to the same high school as
Oh,
Betsy
really?
DeVos. Yeah,
DeVos,
I know
yeah,
the
go
family.
figure.
Like they live in my. I'm from Holland, Michigan.
Yeah.
They're from my hometown. You
Okay,
know?
that's funny.
And it's another one of those things where it's just you see the kind of policies that are like happening, and it's just like, this is the most unchristian thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You know?
So to me, it's a matter of, do I want to go after the symptoms or do I want to go after the cause?
I see the point.
And I feel
see
like
point.
the cause is we're out of a right relationship with God and His Word, and
Mm-hmm.
once we start taking that seriously, some of these different symptoms that are bad, the thing about the environment in America, I believe there's a lot of people that, you were saying it's a Christian society or whatever, it's like a lot of people believe,
founded by
right,
like yeah,
they believe they're Christians, but they're really,
I
their
see what
faith
you're
is
saying,
in capitalism, and that,
and that's the bummer, man. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
So they're not really making the gospel or taking care of the earth their priority,
That's a
or
valid
taking
point,
care of their
yeah.
fellow man.
That's a very valid point.
So that's kind of where I'm at.
No, you're right. It's a tough challenge. I mean, one of the hardest things is proselytizing belief and getting people to trust in in the Word of God in your own community already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even it's not even people atheists or anything like that. It's like people who say they're Christians. It's like, but hold on,
Right.
The fruits that you bear are like not they're not good fruit. It's not good
Yeah.
fruit. You have to look at your roots.
And the vast majority will say something like, I think I'm not a perfect person, but I'm pretty good. I'm good enough for heaven.
Yeah, I got
so
75%
it's like,
there.
if you're good enough, then why did Jesus die on the cross?
No, I
What's
like
the
that point,
purpose
actually.
for
That's a
that?
very
So,
good point.
yeah.
Where it's just like even the most pious among you.
Yeah. So, well, you guys have a nice time together.
Oh, we will, absolutely. And I hope you have a
So,
wonderful day. I hope people are kind.
Let me give you, I usually just try to stop somewhere each day and talk to someone.
Cool.
And this is my blog site.
Nice, wonderful.
So usually I'll get inspired by something we talked about and I'll write about it.
Wonderful.
And so you can check that out, and that's where I go to church. So
Absolutely, wonderful.
So
well,
what-
thank you for
what's your
stopping
name
by.
again?
Stephanie.
Stephanie. So
And
I'm
Bradford.
Jeff. Yeah, and Bradford.
What was
All
your name
right.
again? Oh, wait, hold
Jeff.
on. Jeff.
Yeah.
Nice to
Great-
meet you,
great
Jeff.
talking with
Best
you.
of luck.
Thanks
Yeah,
for your-
yeah.